Shadows over a new dawn, the rise of the unmanned age. The end of the F-104 era did not feel like an ending at all. It felt like a quiet pause, an inhalation before a long, inevitable exhale. The desert ranges where the starfighters once screamed across the sky now sat in uneasy silence. Hangar doors remained open out of habit, as if expecting another drone to roll out at dawn, though everyone knew the last airframe had already surrendered its ghost. Control trailers that once buzzed with anxious radio chatter now smelled of dust and disuse. The men who had spent years guiding the unmanned jets had scattered. Some reassigned, others retired, others transferred to projects that felt painfully mundane in comparison. Yet in these empty spaces, the future lingered like an invisible presence. The F-104's might have disappeared, but what they proved, what they changed, was only beginning its long march into the world. The Air Force never spoke publicly of the drone program's impact, but inside the labyrinth of classified offices, among filing cabinets stuffed with telemetry charts and mission tapes, a realization was beginning to bloom. A new age in warfare had quietly begun. The starfighters had not simply provided missile test data. They had cracked open the notion that pilotless aircraft could do more than crash on command. They could maneuver, evade, deceive, and most importantly, fly missions no human could survive. It was a revelation too large to be acknowledged in the moment. The Cold War demanded secrecy, and secrecy demanded silence. But silence did not stop ideas from evolving. And ideas, as history often proves, are far more resilient than machines. Over the next few years, engineers who had worked the F-104 conversions moved to different bases and laboratories. They carried their knowledge with them, tucked away in memories they could not fully share. They understood remote flight in a way no simulation could teach. They knew the quirks of radio control, the terror of delayed telemetry, the razor-thin balance between stability and aerodynamic catastrophe. They had watched machines shake themselves apart at the edge of physics. They had learned what the desert does to metal and what shock waves do to electronics. They had learned that a machine, if built correctly, could mimic human instinct long enough to fool even tracking systems. They knew things no textbook contained. And quietly, very quietly, those men started shaping the military's next steps. It began, as revolutions often do, with small experimental programs. A handful of engineers proposed that remotely piloted aircraft could play roles in reconnaissance. Small-scale prototypes were tested over secure ranges. They flew slower than the starfighters, carried primitive cameras, and transmitted static-filled video that often failed. But they remained airborne longer than any fighter and cost a fraction of the price. Someone took notice. Elsewhere, engineers wondered whether unmanned craft could be used for electronic warfare, to absorb jammer bursts, provoke enemy radar, or serve as sacrificial decoys during hypothetical conflicts. These ideas were theoretical, too radical to pitch openly, but the seed had been planted by the starfighters. If a 1950s interceptor could dodge missiles under remote control, why couldn't new aircraft be designed from scratch to perform specialized unmanned roles? Yet for all these small sparks, the world outside remained unaware. Newspapers chronicled political upheavals, oil shocks, and a chaotic end to the Vietnam War. Television screens broadcast helicopters lifting refugees, not technicians wiring radio receivers into old fighters. People saw pilots, parades, and air shows, not engineers hunched over radar consoles in dark trailers. The public still imagined future wars dominated by aces in cockpits, not silent drones humming across distant skies, but inside the defense community, hidden from the world that still believed in Top Gun fantasies, whispers were circulating. Something new was coming, something that would reshape everything. The first real shift occurred when analysts began examining data from the F-104 missions with a new perspective. For years, the unmanned starfighters had been used only to test missiles. But now engineers realized that drones had also demonstrated something else: the ability of remote pilots to react to threats with cold precision. Without G-forces crushing their lungs or stalling blood flow to their brains, remote operators could make decisions in conditions that would cripple human pilots. They could fly aircraft into dangerous altitudes, violent turns, and heat envelopes that no biological body could endure. A chilling but undeniable thought began forming among high-ranking strategists. What if future warfare did not require human bodies to be airborne at all? It was not an entirely new idea, but the F-104 program had proven it possible, not theoretically, not hypothetically, but in real desert skies, under real conditions, against real weapon systems. This realization rattled the traditionalists. Fighter pilots, long the stars of the military elite, scoffed at the notion that a remote operator seated in a trailer miles away might one day take over missions reserved for men who risked their lives in the sky. To them, pilotless aircraft were targets, not warriors. But history has a way of turning arrogance into irony. The very same pilots who dismissed drones were flying aircraft whose retired siblings were quietly redefining combat. The starfighters had lived two lives, one as glamorous fighters, another as ghosts. And the ghosts were proving more influential than the glamour. As the 1980s dawned, the political landscape shifted. Technology accelerated. Satellites became sharper, computers became smarter, and electronics shrank at a pace never before seen. Suddenly, the limitations that had constrained the F-104 program, primitive radios, crude analog systems, unpredictable telemetry, no longer seemed insurmountable. Digital control systems entered laboratories, encryption improved, autonomous stabilization algorithms were born. The world was becoming ready for drones, even if it didn't know it. Meanwhile, the men who had guided the starfighters found themselves in high demand. Their experience was no longer niche, it was foundational. They knew what it meant to fly an aircraft without feeling it. They knew how to interpret data before instruments failed. They knew how to keep a machine stable while physics fought against them. They knew the psychology of remote flight, how easy it was to lose awareness, how tempting it was to overcorrect, how terrifying it was to watch a drone begin a death spiral with no way to save it. Such knowledge could not be taught through manuals. It came from loss, from crashes, from long nights in dusty hangars repairing drones destined to die. And so, when new prototype programs appeared, small, slow, ungainly drones meant for reconnaissance, these veterans became the quiet architects behind the scenes. They refined control systems, advised on communication links, and shaped the training of operators who had never touched the wing of a fighter jet. Younger engineers saw only the new era. The veterans saw the ghosts of starfighters, teaching lessons from beyond their aluminum graves. Even as this evolution unfolded, the public remained unaware. Drone testing was framed as minor experimentation. Funding shifted quietly between classified accounts. When prototypes crashed, and they crashed often, no headlines reported the losses. After all, no pilot had died, no flag-draped coffins returned home, only machines had fallen. That was the turning point. During the F-104 era, each loss had carried emotional weight for the operators who grew attached to their drones. But from a political standpoint, unmanned aircraft presented an irresistible advantage. They could be destroyed without public grief. Wars could be fought without the heartbreak that once tormented nations. The absence of human casualties meant the absence of accountability. This realization crept into strategic planning like a virus, quiet, subtle, unnoticed at first, but spreading rapidly. For strategists, drones represented more than innovation. They represented freedom. Freedom from political backlash, freedom from pilot shortages, freedom from the question that haunted every president sending troops into conflict: how many will we lose? With drones, the answer was simple: none. The shift in mindset was slow but unstoppable. Meanwhile, deep in archives nobody visited, dusty boxes contained the remains of the F-104 era. Reports filled with jagged telemetry lines, film reels showing grainy footage of unmanned jets slicing clouds, incident logs describing supersonic crashes, memos pleading for more funding, data tapes containing the recorded heartbeat of early unmanned warfare. Few people realized that inside those boxes lay the genetic blueprint of the drone age. But in the 1980s, as conflict zones shifted and new threats emerged, these archives began to quietly open, not to the public, but to engineers and analysts tasked with solving tactical problems. They combed through F-104 data, seeking patterns, anomalies, insights that had been overlooked. And in those forgotten records, they found gold. They found how early operators compensated for delayed control signals. They found how shockwaves corrupted radio frequencies. They found how supersonic behavior changed under remote inputs. They found how much trust could be placed in a machine before autonomy was needed. And with each rediscovery, the influence of the F-104 drones grew. The Starfighters had died, but their deaths had purpose. Their crashes had meaning. Their sacrifice, strange as it sounded, had value. Engineers began using their lessons to design new aircraft that no longer required repurposed bodies, unmanned systems built from the ground up, aircraft without cockpits, aircraft that didn't need ejection seats or life support systems, aircraft shaped not by pilot physiology, but by aerodynamic efficiency. The ghosts were teaching the living how to build machines that no longer needed ghosts. The first of these new generation drones was not glamorous. It was slow, awkward, and lacked the sleek beauty of the Starfighter. But it flew. It captured images. It returned without a pilot. It did what was needed, and more importantly, it proved that the unmanned concept could evolve beyond targets. Still, the revolution remained in the shadows. No one yet imagined drones would one day dominate battlefields. No one imagined they would become tools of assassination, surveillance, and geopolitics. No one imagined they would reshape the morality of war, the relationship between nations, and the meaning of military sacrifice. But the shift had begun, irreversibly. The old operators felt it most acutely. When they watched prototype drones perform maneuvers, they recognized familiar patterns, the subtle roll corrections, the slight oscillations caused by delayed inputs, the sudden jolts when a gust of wind shoved the aircraft off balance. They saw the Starfighters living on in behaviors, in control algorithms, in design philosophies. The new drones were slower, safer, but the DNA was unmistakable. One retired F-104 operator once said with a bittersweet smile, "Every drone today is part Starfighter. They fly differently, but they're built on the ghosts we guided." And he was right. The continuity was unbroken. By the late 1980s, the military's appetite for unmanned systems had grown. Conflicts in remote regions demanded reconnaissance without risk. The Soviet Union's collapse created technological vacuums that needed filling. Rogue states adopted hidden tactics that required persistent surveillance. Satellites were powerful but predictable. Aircraft were effective but vulnerable. Drones filled the gap perfectly. Thus, small research programs evolved into standing projects. Funding increased, laboratories expanded, operators trained in simulators instead of cockpits. New doctrines quietly replaced old ones. The unmanned age was no longer a hypothetical future. It was emerging, slowly, like a sunrise seen through fog. And still, the world remained unaware of the ancient roots of this transformation. The roots buried in desert crash sites and inside classified hangars where F-104 Starfighters had once fought silent battles. The men who had flown those pilotless jets watched these developments from afar. Some felt pride, some felt melancholy, some felt erased. But all of them knew the truth. Without the Starfighter drones, none of this would exist. Their program had been forgotten publicly, but it had become immortal architecturally. Its lessons fused into the bones of every modern unmanned aircraft. And as the new drone era approached full maturity, the ghosts of those early desert flights lingered like shadows at the edge of a new dawn, reminding anyone who understood that revolutions do not always roar. Sometimes they whisper across empty skies, leaving contrails that only a few will ever recognize. The machine that taught the world to forget limits. By the time the unmanned revolution began tightening its grip on military strategy, few people remembered the F-104's. This was not negligence, it was the natural decay of secrecy. Programs designed to be forgotten succeeded so well that even the men who lived through them sometimes questioned whether their memories were real or half-imagined fragments of feverish work under desert suns. The modern drone age was gathering momentum, and in that momentum, the origins were being pulled deeper into silence. But history has a peculiar inertia. The past, no matter how deeply buried, tends to echo unexpectedly. And in the early 1990s, as war reappeared on the world stage and the United States faced new enemies in unfamiliar landscapes, those echoes finally began to surface. Reports filtered into Pentagon offices describing rugged terrain, hidden compounds, mobile anti-aircraft systems, and the need for reconnaissance in environments where manned flights carried unacceptable risks. For the first time since the F-104 program ended, military planners confronted a question the Starfighters had silently answered decades earlier. What happens when pilots cannot go, but machines can? The shift was immediate. Funding for unmanned systems accelerated. Laboratories expanded. Engineers who had once toiled in obscurity suddenly found themselves at the center of critical initiatives. A new generation of defense thinkers emerged, viewing drones not as experimental toys, but as strategic necessities. They studied every scrap of data, every classified memo from the old Starfighter program. They dissected its remote control limitations, its telemetry behaviors, its aerodynamic lessons, and its brutal failures. They saw the F-104 not as an obsolete fighter, but as a prophet, a machine that had predicted the future long before anyone else could see it. In meetings held in windowless rooms where clearance badges replaced handshakes, analysts reviewed imagery of new drone prototypes. They compared their profiles to archived Starfighter footage, the grainy black and white recordings showing unmanned jets slicing through desert air at Mach 2, wings trembling, telemetry spiking. The resemblance was eerie, not in shape, not in speed, but in purpose. Both generations of drones existed to do what living pilots could not. But this new era demanded more than remote control. It demanded endurance, surveillance, persistence, the ability to loiter in enemy airspace for hours, even days. It demanded drones capable of transmitting video across continents, of navigating autonomously, of hunting and watching without blinking. The Starfighters had been hammers, fast, fierce, sacrificial. The new drones needed to be needles, patient, precise, unrelenting. Yet the DNA of the F-104's persisted. Engineers remembered how remote operators corrected oscillations and compensated for delayed inputs. They translated those instincts into algorithms. What a starfighter pilot once corrected with intuition, a slight left roll, a gentle throttle shift, a high-altitude pitch trim, now became lines of code teaching drones how to stabilize themselves. What men once learned through fear and sweat became machine learning before the term existed. Thus, the ghosts of the starfighters lived on, invisibly, quietly, woven into the circuitry of modern drones. By the time the first long-endurance UAVs successfully flew over conflict zones, the operators controlling them discovered something the F-104 veterans already knew. Remote combat created a psychological distance as vast as the sky itself. Sitting in air-conditioned trailers, thousands of miles from danger, they guided aircraft across battlefields like shadows cast onto maps. It was easier in a way. Safer, cleaner, but it carried weight. One operator described it years later. You forget the aircraft is real until something goes wrong. Then you remember instantly that this machine depends entirely on you. The F-104 crews understood that sentiment well. They had learned it decades earlier, watching drones spiral into oblivion, powerless to save them. The new generation grappled with it too, though their missions carried stakes far beyond data collection. As drones expanded from surveillance to strike capability, the moral landscape shifted. The world now confronted the reality that war no longer required risking pilots or planes. Decisions that once demanded debates over human lives now hinged on machine availability. The starfighters had taught the military that remote flight was possible. The new drones taught the world that remote warfare was unstoppable. This transformation did not happen overnight. It crept forward through conflicts in deserts, mountains, and hidden valleys, places where drones became the soldiers no one mourned. They circled silently above compounds, watching, waiting. They struck targets invisible to satellites. They saved troops by scouting ambushes and revealing hidden roads. They hunted insurgents in darkness and delivered warnings to forces miles away. And every time a drone completed a mission that would have endangered pilots, the F-104 legacy grew, even if no one said its name. Still, the rise of drones produced a paradox that early starfighter operators had seen coming but could not articulate. As unmanned aircraft became more capable, the emotional connection between pilot and machine weakened. The F-104 crews had felt attachment, strange, ironic attachments, to the drones they controlled. They treated them almost like wayward animals that needed guidance. They mourned them when they crashed, even without human casualties. But modern operators rarely felt such connection. Their drones were designed from birth to be replaceable. They had no history, no previous life, no scars from earlier battles. They were tools, not partners. And with that loss of emotional connection came something dangerous. Warfare became easier to begin, harder to contain, and simpler to justify. A nation could deploy drones without risking its citizens. It could conduct operations without congressional debate. It could strike without exposing pilots to capture or death. It could act without the political theater that once restrained governments. This was not a flaw of technology, it was a consequence of evolution. Yet in the background, almost forgotten, the QF-104 program stood like an unmoving pillar. It had demonstrated the promise and peril of unmanned systems before anyone else could comprehend them. It had shown how machines could extend the reach of a military, yet also detach it from risk. It had proven that remote operators could command aircraft with astonishing precision, but also that operators experience stress no less real than pilots in cockpits. In a sense, the QF-104 program was the last unmanned era where operators felt deeply connected to the machines they flew. Every drone had a story. Every wreck felt personal. Every successful flight felt like a victory earned through sweat. Modern drones, sleek and efficient, were different. They were created in large numbers, operated by teams instead of individuals, and seen by commanders as assets rather than companions. But the old veterans never forgot. One retired engineer, years after the unmanned revolution fully matured, visited a museum that displayed a restored F-104 Starfighter, a manned version, polished to brilliance, surrounded by tourists. He walked around it quietly, absorbing the reverent tone of visitors marveling at the aircraft's speed and design. Children posed for photos near the nose cone. A docent explained the altitude records it once held. No one mentioned the drones. No one mentioned the ghost fleet. No one mentioned the unmanned missions that shaped the future far more profoundly than any record-breaking climb. As the engineer stared at the aircraft, he felt a strange mix of pride and sorrow. The plane before him had been preserved as a symbol, elegant, heroic, memorable. But its unmanned siblings, the QF-104's, had been consumed in silence. They had no plaques, no photographs, no recognition. They had simply done their duty, died anonymously, and vanished into obscurity, taking with them an entire chapter of history few would ever learn. Yet the engineer knew the truth. The unmanned starfighters had achieved more in their brief, violent lives than any museum piece ever could. They had been teachers. They had been pioneers. They had been the first machines to break the boundaries between human courage and mechanical sacrifice. And their legacy lived everywhere drones flew. As the modern age accelerated, as drones expanded into space monitoring, humanitarian missions, border patrol, counterterrorism, and global surveillance, the starfighter's shadow stretched across continents, invisible but undeniable. It stretched into the algorithms guiding autonomous stabilization. It stretched into the remote pilot training protocols. It stretched into the moral questions diplomats debated. It stretched into the political consequences nations grappled with. It stretched into the strategies generals crafted. The QF-104's had not been mere drones. They had been the first ambassadors of a world where machines fought wars, watched enemies, and bore burdens once reserved for flesh and blood. And what became of the men who had flown those early unmanned missions? Some aged quietly, never sharing their secrets. Some drank to forget the stress of watching drones fall from the sky. Some taught younger generations, offering lessons without revealing origins. Some passed away with memories still classified, missions they could not recount even to their families. But all of them knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, the moment the future first stirred in the desert. The QF-104's had been crude compared to modern drones, but that crudeness made them heroic. They flew without computer assistance, without advanced stabilization, without satellite links. Their operators fought the aircraft as much as they controlled it, wrestling against physics in a struggle that felt more like combat than programming. Machines like that do not come again. Modern drones are perfect, precise, smooth, engineered without imperfections. The Starfighters were wild, desperate, unpredictable, machines that demanded respect. And in that wildness lay something irreplaceable, a reminder that even in a world drifting toward automation, human instinct had once guided the first unmanned warriors into battle. As the unmanned age reached its current height, with global fleets operating across oceans and continents, a new reality settled over the world. The F-104 Ghosts had succeeded. They had built a future larger than themselves. A future of remote pilots watching screens instead of horizons. A future of drones circling silently above nations. A future where machines became the front line while humans stayed behind. A future predicted by wreckage scattered across forgotten deserts. Now, as militaries prepare for autonomous aircraft that may one day think entirely on their own, the origins matter more than ever. Before artificial intelligence, before satellite control, before global surveillance, there were a handful of starfighters in lonely deserts, flying without pilots, dying without grief, teaching lessons no one else could learn. Those lessons became the future. Those ghosts became the architects. Those forgotten machines, sacrificial, silent, essential, wrote the prologue to the unmanned century. And though history may never fully honor them, the skies they once ruled in secrecy now belong to their descendants. The world has moved on, but their legacy still flies.